The flickering glow of the campfire cast elongated shadows across the rocky clearing, an oasis of light within the vast expanse of darkness stretching beyond. Around the fire, an assortment of young soldiers sat with tense curiosity, their faces, scaled, furred, or entirely alien, illuminated by the flames. Each was fresh from their homeworld, and each had been drawn to this moment by a mix of bravado and nervous energy. Their new uniforms bore the insignia of different star systems, yet tonight they shared a common interest, a collective purpose: to hear the tales of Malikov. Malikov was a veteran, a figure of reverence and intimidation among them. His battle-worn armor, dull and scarred from a lifetime of combat, shimmered dully in the firelight. His eyes, however, pale, with pupils like slits, seemed to drink in the flames, revealing no emotion but the hard resolve of someone who had seen more than he cared to recall. His leathery skin bore the faded marks of countless battles, and a jagged scar ran across his cheekbone, as if nature itself had intended to carve a reminder of his survival into his face. The younger soldiers whispered among themselves, their voices hushed but tinged with excitement. They'd heard tales, fragments of stories passed down in mess halls and barracks, tales that sounded almost mythic, of Malikov's brutal campaigns, his countless victories, his experience with that most mysterious of enemies, the humans. Finally, a daring voice broke the silence. It was Drax, a lanky soldier with shimmering green scales, his eyes gleaming with both respect and youthful arrogance. "Is it true, Malikov? Is it true that humans fight as though they have nothing to lose?" Malikov looked at Drax for a long moment, unblinking. The young soldier's eager face showed no hint of fear, only fascination, as though he hoped to hear a tale of some feeble, vanquished race. The others leaned in, anticipation etched across their varied faces. Malikov allowed the silence to stretch, letting their impatience simmer. "They fight," he began, his voice deep and resonant. Each word weighed as if recalling it brought forth memories clawing to be forgotten, as if they are made of something harder than any metal, something woven with both madness and endurance. "They fight like they are not bound by any of the limits we know." His words hung in the air, heavy with a gravity that silenced even the faintest whispers. The young soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, their initial amusement fading. A soldier with spiked armor, known as Rydar, leaned forward, crossing his arms. "But they're only human, aren't they? The same species that huddles on one fragile world." Malikov's lip curled, not quite a smile, more an expression of bitter understanding. "That's what we all thought," he said quietly. "That's what every invading force thought, at first." His gaze drifted into the fire, as though staring back into the past, back into the heart of the battles he had survived. Humans turn every inch of their world into a weapon," he continued, his voice sharpening. "They don't rely on sheer numbers or brute technology. They rely on something far more dangerous. Their will." He turned his gaze on the young faces before him, their expressions now touched with traces of discomfort. "What does that even mean?" scoffed a younger soldier, attempting to hide his unease with bravado. "Every species has will." Malikov shook his head slowly. "Not like humans. When you look into their eyes on the battlefield, it's as though you're staring into the depths of a relentless storm. Their resolve is chilling." He paused, letting that word resonate. "They adapt to anything. No setback is final to them. They lose, they learn, and they come back. Stronger, harder, more relentless." The fire crackled as the soldiers absorbed his words. Drax, the green-scaled soldier, seemed unsettled, his initial confidence faltering. He cleared his throat, his voice lower this time. "But what could they possibly do that any trained battalion of ours couldn't handle?" Malikov glanced at him, his gaze both weary and intense. "Once on Earth, my squad was stationed in what seemed a harmless jungle. We underestimated the terrain, and they—" He paused, a grim smile flickering across his face. "They used the very air against us, weaving through the trees like shadows. It was as if the land itself obeyed them. I watched entire squads vanish into the night, struck down by enemies they never saw. The soldiers listened rapt and wide-eyed, their confidence wavering with each word. In their minds, they'd pictured humans as inferior beings, an easy conquest. But Malakov's words painted a different image, one that scratched at their bravado and planted seeds of fear. Humans don't fight for territory or for power, Malakov went on, his tone hardening. They fight for something we've never fully understood. I've seen humans fight for each other, for beliefs and bonds that run so deep. They become unbreakable. Another soldier, smaller and silent until now, finally spoke. So, they're driven by loyalty? Not just loyalty, Malakov replied, his voice dropping to a near whisper. It's something stronger, a desperation, a fire that consumes them in the heat of battle. You see, to them, every conflict feels like it could be their last. And so, they throw everything they have into it, holding nothing back. The young soldiers stared into the fire, the flickering flames casting shifting patterns on their uncertain faces. Malakov let the silence linger, allowing his words to settle deep into their thoughts. Some tried to appear unfazed, but a shadow of doubt had crept into their expressions. Believe me, Malakov said, leaning forward, his gaze hardening, if you ever face a human on the battlefield, you'll understand. And by then, it may be too late. The crackling fire punctuated his words, an eerie silence falling over the group as his gaze held each soldier's attention. They could feel the weight of his experiences, the darkness in his tone that no amount of bravado could dismiss. One by one, they averted their eyes, the firelight reflecting the glimmer of apprehension that had replaced their previous confidence. The campfire burned on, casting a warm but haunting glow. The young soldiers sat in silence, their thoughts pulled into a new awareness, each of them sensing that tonight's stories would mark the end of their innocence. The memory of Malakov's words settled into their minds, and the night stretched on, promising a tale that none of them would soon forget. Malakov's voice, low and resonant, wove through the firelit circle like a spell. The young soldiers, still haunted by his words, leaned closer, their expressions now marked by a strange mix of fear and fascination. Drax, once brazen in his questioning, sat silent, his scales seeming to lose some of their sheen under Malakov's gaze. You think you know what a battlefield looks like, Malakov began, his gaze sweeping over the young faces. You're used to vast, open spaces, neatly defined lines, carefully laid out strategies. He shook his head, as if recalling a memory too powerful to be contained. But Earth is different. It's as though the entire planet fights alongside them. Rydar, the spiked armored soldier, shifted uneasily. What do you mean? How can a planet fight? Malakov's eyes darkened, his expression unreadable. The first time I landed on Earth, I felt an unease unlike any I'd known. The atmosphere was thick, heavy with the scent of life, and a quiet, ominous hum pulsed in the air, like the heartbeat of some unseen giant. Every inch of Earth seemed to be alive and watching. He paused, letting his words seep in before continuing. Humans are masters of adaptation. They've learned to turn their surroundings into weapons, even the environment itself. They use the land, the weather, every piece of their world to their advantage. And when we invaded, it felt as though the planet itself resisted us. Rydar frowned. Surely you don't mean... I mean exactly that, Malakov interrupted, his voice a near growl. When our ships descended, we expected a clean landing. We'd done it 100 times on other worlds. But Earth refused us. His expression hardened, memories of battles etched in every line of his face. It began with a sudden fog, thick and blinding. We thought it was a coincidence, a trick of the weather. But then, as we moved deeper, we realized it was deliberate. The young soldiers exchanged uncertain glances, the idea unsettling. Drax finally spoke, his voice tentative. Fog can't be deliberate. Malakov's gaze pinned him down. That's what we thought too, until the fog shifted, forming pockets and corridors as if guiding us into traps. Human snipers waited, picking off my men one by one. I lost count of how many fell, never even glimpsing the enemy. His voice softened, almost a whisper, as he added. It was as if the planet had joined their ranks, each step leading us deeper into its clutches. The fire crackled, punctuating his words with eerie precision. Another young soldier, gray-skinned and quiet until now, leaned forward. But what could fog and traps do against a fully armed force? Malikov let out a low, humorless chuckle. It wasn't just the fog. It was everything. The humans used the rivers to isolate us, funneling our forces into narrow choke points where our numbers meant nothing. They even used the wildlife against us, creatures that we dismissed as harmless. Imagine facing a swarm of beasts with fangs and claws, creatures driven by the humans' will to defend their home. A murmur rippled through the group. Some looked skeptical, others unnerved, but all were silent, absorbed in Malakov's story. He continued, his voice grim. They didn't need high-tech weapons or massive fleets. They wielded their forests, their mountains, their very air. Even the storms seemed to fight with them, lightning crashing down as if guided by some unseen hand. Drax, his face a mix of awe and disbelief, shook his head. So, they turned their world into a fortress. A fortress? Malikov scoffed. More like a living, breathing beast. A beast that humans command without fear. He leaned forward, his expression fierce. They know every inch of that planet, every hidden ravine, every shadowed path. The land is a part of them, and they have learned to bend it to their will. One soldier, nervous but curious, ventured, but why go to such lengths? Couldn't they just use weapons like the rest of us? Malikov's gaze turned hard, because for humans, war isn't just a battle. It's survival. Earth has been their crucible for millennia. Storms, predators, famine. Every disaster has forged them, hardened them. And when we arrived, we were nothing more than the next threat in a long line. To them, war was just another challenge to endure, and they would defend their world with everything it offered. Rydar's spikes flattened, a clear sign of unease. You make it sound as though they enjoy the fight. Malikov's eyes narrowed. They don't enjoy it, but they do understand it, perhaps better than any other species. Humans embrace war not out of bloodlust, but because they see it as a test of their resolve. They view each conflict as a chance to prove themselves, to rise stronger from the ashes. He paused, the faintest hint of respect in his tone. And they're terrifyingly good at it. The fire's glow seemed dimmer now, as if even the flames hesitated under Malikov's intense recollections. The young soldiers were silent, absorbing the weight of his words. Malikov's gaze drifted back to the fire, and for a moment, he seemed lost in his memories. Then he looked up, his expression unreadable but his tone unmistakably grave. The more we pushed, the harder Earth pushed back. It's a place that fights with a fury unlike any I've seen. Humans have woven that fury into themselves, into every inch of their world. When you step onto their soil, you feel it, a relentless pulse, like the planet itself wants you gone. The young soldiers felt a chill, as though the fire itself had turned cold. Malikov's eyes swept over them, each gaze seeming to weigh the potential bravery or fear in their faces. Remember this, he said quietly, when you think about humanity, they may not have the most advanced weapons. They may not be the strongest physically, but their world is their ally, a force we barely understand, and they are bound to it in ways we can't comprehend. Face them on Earth, he added, and you face the planet itself. The silence that followed was thick, each soldier staring into the flames, perhaps imagining the hostile, living world that Malikov had described. For the first time, the reality of Earth as a battleground, a planet that fought side by side with its people, sank into their minds. And as the night wore on, Malikov's words lingered, a grim reminder that there were battles yet to come, and Earth would be waiting. As the embers glowed in the dying fire, the young soldiers remained rooted in place, no longer certain of the bravery they had once worn so proudly. The fire crackled softly as Malakov's story drifted into the still night air, gripping his audience with every vivid detail. The young soldiers had settled into an uneasy silence, a newfound respect and apprehension visible on each face. Malakov paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. Then, as if drawn by an invisible thread, he continued, "My first true confrontation with human soldiers happened at an outpost near the edge of a dense forest on Earth. We thought it would be an easy victory. A small human base, lightly guarded, hardly a challenge for a well-trained unit. But nothing on Earth is as simple as it seems." Malakov's gaze sharpened as he recalled the events. We quickly discovered that even a remote outpost could become a nightmare in the hands of those who called it home. The soldiers leaned in, their eyes fixed on him, waiting for the story to unfold. Our objective was simple: secure the outpost, eliminate any resistance, and hold the location until our main force arrived. As we approached, the forest loomed like a wall of shadows, every tree seeming to guard what lay beyond. The air was thick, carrying a scent of damp earth and leaves. A strange silence blanketed the area. The humans knew we were coming. Malakov paused, his gaze fixed on the fire, as if seeing that dark forest once again. He continued, his voice taking on a darker edge. "We moved in quickly, or so we thought. But before we even reached the perimeter, they struck. Out of nowhere, gunfire echoed through the trees. Human snipers were hidden in the branches, their shots precise, deadly. One by one, my men fell, barely able to see where the bullets were coming from. The forest became a maze, every turn a trap. A soldier with silver-toned skin shifted uncomfortably. How could they ambush an entire unit? They used their surroundings," Malakov replied, his tone tense. "They knew every inch of that forest. We were trespassers, stumbling through a land that was theirs to command. Their attacks were swift, coordinated, and they fought with an intensity that was unsettling. I still remember their faces, grim, determined. They were fewer in number, yet they fought as though they had nothing to lose." He leaned forward, his expression grim. But it wasn't just the snipers. The forest itself seemed to close in on us. As night fell, the darkness grew thick, impenetrable. We heard sounds all around, leaves rustling, branches snapping. It was as if the whole forest was alive, warning us, mocking us. Another soldier spoke up, his voice a blend of fear and disbelief. "Are you saying the humans controlled the forest?" "No," Malakov replied, "but they knew how to use it. Their tactics were unlike anything we'd encountered. They didn't rely on brute strength or overwhelming force. They used patience, stealth, and their deep connection to the land. Every rock, every shadow became part of their strategy." His voice dropped to a whisper, as if reliving the fear. "They didn't just fight us, they haunted us." Drax, who had remained uncharacteristically silent, finally spoke. "So what happened? Did you retreat?" Malakov's jaw clenched. Retreat wasn't an option. We were ordered to hold the outpost at all costs. So we dug in, hoping to fortify our position and wait for reinforcements. He glanced around the circle, the firelight casting eerie shadows on his face. But the humans didn't give us that chance. They didn't storm the outpost or attack in waves. Instead, they harried us night after night, picking us off, wearing us down. He took a deep breath, the memory clearly weighing on him. The first night, they cut off our supplies, targeting our transports. They knew exactly where to hit. By the second night, we were down to rationing what little food and ammunition we had. Morale was low. My men were terrified. There was no telling when or where the next attack would come. They saw us, but we couldn't see them. A young soldier with emerald scales interrupted, her voice barely a whisper. "What did you do?" Malakov looked at her, his gaze hard. We fought back the only way we knew how, with sheer force. We tried to flush them out, burning sections of the forest, using explosives to tear down trees and destroy their cover. But it only seemed to anger them more. They retaliated with traps, guerrilla strikes, always staying one step ahead. His face darkened. By the third night, I'd lost nearly half my unit. The campfire crackled as the young soldiers sat in stunned silence, the gravity of Malakov's words settling over them like a shroud. The idea of human soldiers using the very land against their enemies, striking like phantoms in the dark, was both thrilling and terrifying. Malakov's gaze turned distant, as if he were peering back through time. On the fourth night, when we were down to our last men, we heard something, a sound that filled the forest like thunder. At first, we thought it was more humans coming to finish us off. But then, we realized it was something else entirely. He paused, letting his words linger, the tension palpable. The young soldiers shifted, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension in their faces. Malakov's voice dropped to a near whisper, his tone filled with an odd reverence. It was a lone human soldier, marching through the forest as if he owned it. He wore a cloak of leaves and branches, almost blending into the shadows. I'll never forget his eyes, cold, unyielding, filled with a purpose that seemed unbreakable. He was a one-man army, cutting down any who dared to stand in his path. The young soldiers' faces reflected a mix of awe and horror. Malakov let the silence settle before he continued, his voice softer now, almost regretful. In the end, we had no choice. We abandoned the outpost, retreating under cover of night. Those who survived barely made it out alive. The humans claimed the outpost without losing a single soldier. He looked around the circle, meeting each gaze with an intensity that was almost painful. That night, I understood something, he said quietly. It wasn't their weapons or even their tactics that made humans dangerous. It was their will, their relentless, unyielding spirit. They would rather burn their own forests, sacrifice their own lives, than let us win. The silence stretched heavy and profound, as Malakov's words echoed in the minds of the young soldiers. Each one seemed to be contemplating the reality of what they would face if they ever crossed paths with Earth's defenders. And as Malakov's gaze fell back to the fire, the embers glowing softly in the night, the young soldiers realized something chilling. To face humans on their home turf was to face the wrath of an entire world, wielded by the hands of warriors who fought not just with weapons, but with an indomitable spirit. The outpost had been a lesson in humility, a brutal reminder of what awaited those who dared to challenge Earth's defenders. The young soldiers sat in a stunned silence as Malakov's tale of survival and defeat drifted into the embers of the campfire. For some, his story conjured a new, lingering fear of Earth's warriors. For others, it was a profound revelation of what true resilience looked like. Malakov watched their faces, gauging the shifting emotions with a practiced eye, his own expression hardened by memories. Breaking the silence, a soldier with deep blue skin and a sharp, contemplative look finally spoke. So, humans don't just fight for territory or resources. They fight as if every battle defines them. Malakov nodded slowly. Precisely. They don't see combat as a means to an end, but as a testament to their endurance. Every inch of their world, every conflict they endure, is woven into their legacy. It's why they'll use everything, rocks, trees, the very air around them, to turn even a losing battle into a story of victory. Another soldier, younger than most and with bright amber eyes, looked up, visibly shaken. But if they're so unstoppable, why haven't they conquered more? Why don't they wage war across the galaxy? Malakov's gaze softened and he sighed. That's the paradox of humanity. They're fierce, yet rarely the aggressors. For them, war is a means of survival, not domination. I believe that's what makes them even more dangerous. When humans engage in battle, it's not about gain. It's about preservation. And there's nothing more deadly than a species fighting to protect what it holds dear. The amber-eyed soldier swallowed, understanding the weight of Malakov's words. But how do we face that? Is there any way to defeat them? A shadow of a smile crossed Malakov's face, though it didn't reach his eyes. I don't have an answer for that. My years in battle taught me that it's impossible to truly break humanity's will. You may win a battle, take their outposts, or even raise their cities, but their resolve will only strengthen. He leaned back, his eyes fixed on the stars. They endure, and the more you push them, the harder they push back. The fire flickered, casting shifting shadows over the soldiers, each one lost in thought. Malakov allowed the silence to settle before speaking again, his voice lower now, tinged with a strange respect. I fought in countless campaigns across dozens of worlds, but none have left a mark on me like Earth. I realized, standing in the ruins of that forest, that we hadn't defeated them. We'd merely survived an encounter with a force that is never truly defeated. Drax, who had been quietly listening all along, leaned forward, his expression dark. Then why tell us this, Malakov? If we're destined to lose, what's the point? Malakov's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something fierce flashing across his face. Because you must understand who you're up against. It's not a story meant to instill fear, but caution, respect. Humanity won't crumble under brute force or intimidation. To underestimate them is to court disaster. Another soldier spoke up, his voice wary but curious. So, if they're that resilient, why does the Galactic Council keep sending forces to Earth? Surely they know what we're facing. Malakov's gaze grew distant, a bitter edge in his tone. The Council doesn't see humanity as anything more than a resource, a potential thorn in their side. They believe that overwhelming power will eventually wear down even the toughest opponents. He shook his head. But the Council has never looked into the eyes of a human soldier on their own soil. They don't understand what I've seen, what I know. The soldiers glanced at each other, absorbing the weight of his warning. Malakov's words hung heavily over them, each one grappling with the sobering reality of the adversary they would one day face. As the conversation wound down, Malakov's gaze shifted once again to the fire. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Humanity's strength lies not just in their weapons, but in their unwavering spirit. The Council sees them as a nuisance, but to underestimate them is to invite ruin. A silence fell over the group, each soldier processing Malakov's words, trying to imagine what it would be like to face humanity's wrath. In the dim firelight, they looked less like eager soldiers and more like contemplative beings, pondering the fate that awaited them should they find themselves on Earth's unforgiving soil. Finally, Drax stood up, breaking the tense atmosphere. Malakov, if we meet these humans, we'll be prepared. We know what they're capable of now. There was a note of defiance in his tone, but Malakov could sense the faint tremor beneath his confidence. Malakov nodded, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. Good. Remember this night, and remember my words. If you ever cross paths with humanity, do so with caution and respect. They are not just warriors. They are survivors, defenders, and builders of a legacy forged in the fires of every battle they've endured. One by one, the young soldiers rose, each offering Malakov a nod of respect before disappearing into the night. The amber-eyed soldier was the last to leave, casting one last, questioning look at Malakov, as if searching for an answer that still eluded him. When he was finally alone, Malakov stared into the dying embers, his mind drifting back to the forest, to the cold eyes of that lone human warrior who had haunted his nightmares for years. He closed his eyes, feeling a strange peace settle over him. In his heart, he knew that these young soldiers would face trials as he had, and they would come to understand the truth he had tried to impart. As the campfire dwindled to a faint glow, Malakov murmured to himself, "They may not fear us, but perhaps one day they will respect us as we respect them." And in that quiet, solitary moment, he knew that the story of Earth's strength and resilience would continue to ripple through the stars, a silent warning to all who dared to challenge them.